If you're having difficulty squaring that club face at impact and you're continuously leaving it open or closed, resulting in a hook or a slice, then what I'm about to show you is going to fix those issues for good. But the first thing we need to understand is what is causing those issues, and the answers lie in your wrist angles. Now, after watching this video, I guarantee you'll never wonder why your face was open or closed at impact ever again. Let's get stuck in. So let's go over how the wrists affect the club face. Now there's three different types of wrist angles that golfers have. We have a flat lead wrist, we have an extended or cupped lead wrist, and we have a flexed or bowed lead wrist. To show you what a flat lead wrist would look like, when I get to the top of my golf swing, you're going to see that the angle here, you can see that my lead wrist is nice and flat. A flexed or bowed lead wrist would look something like that. So someone like a Dustin Johnson has a lot of flex or bowing in their lead wrist. And of course the other one is the extension or the cupping of the lead wrist, which then looks more like that. And you can see there's quite a lot of angle here, and that's what we call extension or cupping. So again, flat lead wrist, bowed or flex lead wrist, and then an extended or cupped lead wrist. So understanding those wrist angles is great, but how do they affect the club face at the end of the day? Now we're going to assume that I take a neutral grip with my lead hand on this occasion, and what we're going to see here is if I have a flat lead wrist at the top of my swing, my club face is going to be nice and square. If I flex my lead wrist, i.e. a Dustin Johnson, with my neutral grip, you're going to see that that actually closes the face. So every time I bow or flex my lead wrist, that club face will move into a more closed or shut position. And if I have more of an extended or cupped lead wrist, that will always move my golf club or my club face into a more open position. So again, if I just stand here and I go flat lead wrist, club face is nice and square, bowed lead wrist, club face is shutting down a little bit more, and then ultimately an extended or cupped lead wrist is going to open that face a lot more. Now the other thing that can influence your club face at the top of the golf swing and at impact is actually how you grip the golf club. Now the key here is to match your grip type with your wrist angles to get the most ideal club face position at the top of the golf swing. So we already know that if you've got a neutral grip, if I get to the top of my golf swing with a nice flat lead wrist, that club face is going to be fairly square. With that neutral grip, if I extend my wrist, my club face opens, and if I bow or flex that lead wrist, my club face closes. Now what happens if you have a weak grip? Well, if you get your lead hand more underneath the grip, at the top of the golf swing, if we have a flat lead wrist, what you're going to see is that club face is actually quite open now. So if you've got a weak lead hand grip, you are going to need more flexion or more bowing in your lead wrist in order to close that club face or to have it in a stronger position. You absolutely do not want to extend your lead wrist if you have a weak grip, because that's just going to open that club face a lot. And this is what's going to result in a lot of high right shots and a lot of slices for the amateur golfer. Now, if you're someone who plays with a really strong grip, whereby your lead hand is much more on top of the club, well, if you have a flat lead wrist at the top of the golf swing, you actually might find that your club face is actually a little bit strong in this case. Now, if you do have this kind of a grip, you absolutely do not want to have more flexion in that lead wrist, because that face is going to be super shut and you're going to hit nothing but left balls. So what we actually can do with a stronger grip is we are allowed some extension in this lead wrist. And you can see there that my club face is still relatively strong or square, even if I have an extended lead wrist at the top of my golf swing. So as you can see there, there's an array of different grip types that you can play with but it means you must match your wrist angles to your grip type, which then ultimately end up affecting the club face at the top, and then ultimately affecting that club face at impact. So how would we train our most ideal wrist angles for your grip type? Well, if you're sitting here and you're getting to the top, I can't quite see my wrist angle right now. So I'm kind of guessing a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a device that's going to make it super simple and really effective in order to train your wrist angles without having to try and look at those wrists at the top of your golf swing. So what I've got on my wrist right here is what we call a hack motion device. Now, these things are like your launch monitors for the golf ball, except it's for your wrist. So when you're looking to train your wrist angles, depending on the grip type that you're using, so that you can control the club face throughout your swing, this is just an unbelievable training aid that you can utilize at home, on the driving range, when you're practicing. So the great thing about this device is it measures how much extension you have and how much flexion you have. So if you think back to all the grip types that we spoke about, depending on your grip type, you needed different wrist angles at the top of the swing to control that club face. And this is exactly what you need in order to do that, because if you had a weak grip, you don't really want a flat lead wrist at the top. You want more of a flex lead wrist. But how much flex? That's what we need to decide. And this is what this hack motion device can do. We can actually set up ranges for your wrist angles to be in. So what I've actually done now is I've set up my iPad and my hack motion to tell me when my lead wrist is in a most ideal range. Now, let's assume that I've got a neutral grip. I'm going to want to see this lead wrist in a flat position. So I'm going to put on a range for this hack motion to make a noise through the iPad when my lead wrist is anywhere between 5 degrees extended and 5 degrees flexed. And it will sound a little bit like this. And you can hear that noise when my lead wrist is in a nice flat position. If I were to extend my lead wrist too much, it wouldn't be making that noise. So as you can see right now, I have my lead wrist in a lot of extension because I don't want that sound to come on when I'm in the wrong position. So if I was to take my golf club and grip it and get to the top of my golf swing with the wrong wrist angles, you won't hear any noise. But if I was able to get to the top of my golf swing with my lead wrist in a flat position, you're going to hear the noise from the hack motion. So if I do some drills and I take my grip and I get to the top, let's say I've got a neutral grip and I get to the top of my golf swing with too much extension, which is what a lot of golfers have. We're going to not hear, essentially, that hack motion doing anything. But if I was to go to the top of the golf swing with the correct wrist angles, or the wrist angles that I've selected within the range that I want on the hack motion, you're going to see that it's very easy to train when my lead wrist is in the right spot. Now essentially, you could do this for the downswing as well. Let's say that you wanted your lead wrist to be nice and flat on the way down, or even into a little bit of flexion, which is kind of ideal for a neutral grip. Well, I could get to the top of my golf swing and I could feel like I keep that sound on the hack motion the entire way down. So let's say I was someone with an extremely strong grip and I didn't want to get that club face too closed at the top, so I don't want a nice flat lead wrist. I actually want an extended lead wrist at the top of the swing. Well, what you can do is you can come into the app and you can change the feedback range. So if you're someone who has a really strong grip, let's say we want to work on some more extension in the lead wrist because you keep hitting it left by trying to work on this flat, this flat and bowed lead wrist. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to select 35 degrees of extension, which is a lot. But if you've got a super strong grip, you kind of need a little bit of extension there. And I'm going to set the range to, let's call it 0, so that any extension in your lead wrist is going to make that sound. So when I start to move my wrist now into extension, you're going to see that essentially makes a sound to tell me that I'm in the right spot. Now you can also see on the screen here that right now I have my lead wrist into, let's call it 48 degrees of flexion, which is bowing. So I want to turn that into extension, and it will make a sound as long as I'm in that extension range. So if I take my grip, I'm going to be in extension because a strong grip will give me a lot of extension here. And I want to maintain that all the way to the top of the golf swing. And you're going to see that that's an ideal way to train my wrist angles. So let's say I was someone with a super weak grip and actually needed this lead wrist into flexion at the top of the golf swing. Well, I'm just going to come into here and I'm going to change my ranges. So I'm going to go into, let's say, 0 degrees, and anything from 0 degrees to -15 in flexion. That'll be pretty much ideal to now start to hear that noise again. So if we put this back on the ground and we take our golf club, if I take my weak grip, there's still going to be some extension in that lead hand, even with a weak grip. But now I get to train moving this wrist into a more flexed position. So I take my weak grip and I try and get that lead wrist into a nice flex position there. And I can set that range to go more if I really wanted to as well. So this is just a foolproof way to train your wrist angles to make sure that your club face is ideal at the top, depending on your grip type. And that's the most essential thing to understand here, is your grip type determines what your wrist angles should be. And this Hack Motion device gives us a foolproof way of working on the most ideal wrist angles for your grip type. So let's go ahead and hit 3 golf shots. I'm going to attempt to try and hit the ball nice and straight with 3 different grip types. Now this is going to be a challenge for me because I use a grip that's fairly neutral to strong. So I'm going to try and do this with a weak grip, a really strong grip, and a neutral grip, and see what I come up with. But essentially, at impact, I'm going to need different wrist angles, essentially. More flexion for a weak grip, more extension for a strong grip, and fairly neutral for a neutral grip. So we're going to start off with just a neutral grip, which is what I typically use. And we can see on the device there that at setup, I'm at about 22 to 23 to 25 maybe degrees extension at setup. So at impact, let's see how much extension my lead wrist is actually in. So that was a pretty good strike there, a little bit heavy. But you can see there I actually get into about 19 degrees of flexion at impact with my grip. And you do, I don't know if you saw that from the down the line camera, but it did go a little bit left. So if I'm in a little bit too much flexion with my grip type, then that is going to go left. So that gives me a really good indication. Now, if I try to hit another golf shot, and let's say I use a really strong grip. So I'm gonna have to do everything I can here to stop this ball going left, which means I may need a little bit more extension in that impact area. So you can see here I've taken a super strong grip. This just feels like it's gonna go left for me. And you can see at setup, I'm in like 32 degrees of extension. So any type of flexion here, you can see there I'm moving my lead wrist into flexion. Even just, 0 degrees, that's going to close my club face an awful lot. I mean, that's 14, so there's 0 right there, and that face is still closed. So I actually need, let's call it 10 degrees of extension, which, if you've watched a lot of videos on wrist angles, you've always been told to flatten the lead wrist. Well, depends on your grip type, which is kind of what this whole video is about here. So I'm going to take that super strong grip and let's see what my impact is and what my ball flight is. Oh, I hit that so fat. So there you can see my impact was actually in flexion. Now, if I've got a really strong grip and I move that lead wrist into flexion, that's going to shut the face down, which causes those fat shots. So let's give that one more go and see if I can actually get it into extension. But you can see here that I'm a professional golfer who gets their lead wrist into flexion. So for me to get it into extension is actually quite difficult, which is maybe a good thing for me. So let's give this another go. Super strong grip. I've got to keep it in extension at impact. It was not too bad. It's a nice straight shot. I still hit it fat. I still got it at -7 inflection at impact. So I'm struggling a lot here to try and get that extension. But let's go into the last one, which is a really weak grip, which maybe might suit me given the fact I need more flexion for a weak grip. So I'm going to take my lead hand and get it really weak, which means that set up, you can see that I'm only in a little bit of extension there, and at impact I really need to have about 25 degrees of flexion. Any type of extension here, and I'm going to have that face way open. So I'm going to need about 25 degrees flexion is my goal. Let's see if I can do this. This is difficult. So you can see there 17 degrees of flexion, but I just could not trust that weird feel from the top. I'm going to give this one more go. Not too bad there, a bit skinny and right. Again, these are super weird feels for me. But my impact there was 22 degrees of flexion. For me, it's just a trust thing with that feeling at the top. I'm going to give you one more shot to prove that I'm not a chopper and that I can actually flush golf shots with my normal setup routines. So I'll take my normal setup, my normal grip, and let's see how we go here. On the hack motion, we can see about 30 degrees of extension, and let's see if I can hit a nice straight one. Ooh, baby, that was pure. So there you go, nice straight golf shot, pretty pure. 13 degrees of flexion at impact, and that was able to then give me that really nice look through that impact area where my hands are forward, my shaft's leaning forward, my lead wrist is in a little bit of flexion, which is nice, just due to the fact that I don't have an ultra strong grip. But there you can see I can actually hit good golf shots. It's just when the face feels weird for me at the top, I struggle to come down and hit it. But that's the great thing about the hack motion. We can use it to learn and to practice. The other thing to note here as well is the top of my backswing on that particular golf shot that I hit really well. This was my stock shot. You can see there that at the top of the golf swing, I was in +7 degrees, so in extension at the top. So everyone trying to get this beautifully flat lead wrist at the top, again, it depends on your grip. You can see there at address, I was in extension. I was in 27 degrees of extension. At the top, I was at 7 degrees of extension, and then at impact, I was at -13 degrees of flexion. So I've gone from extension, still a little bit of extension, but then at impact, as a good player and as a good golfer, I know that I needed some flexion at the bottom to get that nice shaft lean, divot in front of the golf ball, and a beautiful golf shot. So when you're using your hack motion device, you don't need to be perfectly zero or flat at the top of the golf swing. Hopefully what you've taken away from this video is it is all grip dependent. And when you're working on your own game, you need to figure out exactly what your best numbers are in order to hit golf shots that look like that. So if you are looking for your own hack motion device, hack motion have 3 different types of tiers that you can purchase. They've got the Pro tier, which gives you everything, and they've got a basic tier for just the bare minimum that you might need. If you click the link in my description below, you can get up to $50 off your own hack motion device. That's in USD, so there's quite a lot of savings there. And this will be a sure way for you to practice and get better when it comes to your wrist angles at the top of the golf swing, and finally being able to control that club face at the top through impact and start hitting the golf ball much better.